How did I find myself in an airport buying a book called How to Work with People You Hate? I was working at a company with the two most vile humans I had ever met, and unfortunately they were my peers in the senior leadership team, and I couldn't avoid them. I had to find a way to cope. More importantly, they both had outsized influence with the top executive at the company, so I had to approach my awful coworker problem in a way that made it clear that they were the problem. So I developed a system to deal with difficult coworkers to make them a non-issue, and especially not a you problem in the eyes of leadership. In today's video, I'm going to spill those strategies and give you some tips to protect your peace in the situation. But first, we need to confront the obvious. Whenever one of my clients is dealing with someone that they don't like at work, my first question is always this: what is causing the clash? Typically, it comes down to one of these three things. First, they might just be working with a jerk. The two coworkers that I mentioned bullied others at the company, belittled their team members, and led the toxic office politics dynamic at the company. You know, the gossiping, backstabbing, and the general disruption that these types cause. Second, your coworker might be a power player, or at least an aspiring one. So many of my clients have experienced this, especially with a coworker who started out as a work friend. This coworker knows how smart, talented, and full of potential you are, and that they can't compete with you on merit. This causes them to lash out at you, typically in a passive-aggressive fashion. Finally, you just might not like your coworker because the vibes are off. Your coworker might be perfectly nice, respectful, and professional, but there's just something about them that you can't put your finger on. Side note, I had one of these coworkers early in my career, which I couldn't stand for no reason at all. Now, of course, I didn't make it obvious and I kept a good working relationship with everyone that I worked with, but she was my Beck. She ended up not liking me after I got a promotion that she wanted, and she made her disdain for me a spectacle, which thankfully our manager held her accountable for. Anyways, a few months after I left the company for a better job, a friend of mine who was still at the organization called me to spill the tea. The coworker that I didn't like had just been fired for stealing from the company. Turns out she had been robbing them blind. This totally vindicated the reason why I didn't like her, but I tell you this to highlight one thing. When you're dealing with someone that you do not like at work, you cannot be the problem even when they are the raging one. When you have an awful coworker that you cannot avoid, you need to neutralize their toxicity, and you have to do it in a way that ensures that your reputation and your results are protected. So let's get into some strategies to do just that. One of my clients made a massive mistake. She had a problem with one of her coworkers, and she didn't keep it a secret. No, she didn't lose it on them in front of everyone, but she did complain to her boss about them. While her boss did give her somewhat helpful suggestions to deal with the situation, a few weeks later she was passed over for a highly visible project assignment. She was confused because there was already discussions about her working on it. She asked her boss about it in their next one-on-one, and she found out that her coworker was on the project, so they left her off of it to minimize potential problems. Which brings us to the first strategy: to work with people that you don't like. Do not broadcast your disdain. Whether you like your coworker, hate your coworker, or are totally indifferent to your coworker, it's nobody's business. As soon as the fact that you work with someone that you don't like is known around the office, drama follows. My client had no working issues with the person that she didn't like, and the reason why she didn't like her coworker was not relevant. And until she spoke to her boss about it, they had no idea there was any tension. But the fact it was known became a professional risk factor. Which brings me to the second strategy: to work with people that you don't like. You can be working with the most toxic person you have ever encountered, like I did, but if you react, they win. When you react to something that a toxic coworker does, the issue escalates, both in the problem's size and in its visibility. I made the mistake with one of my vile coworkers by asking what I thought was a benign question, but it was one that inadvertently and publicly exposed her incompetence. And she lashed out. There was a massive outburst in the middle of the office, and frankly, I played into her trap at the time, which was not only awkward AF for everyone around us, but it made the situation a whole thing that required effort to de-escalate, which is what led to me shopping for books to cope. The other thing that happens is if your coworker was trying to get a reaction, they just won. I'm not saying let them get away with everything. I'm gonna come back to constructive conflict because it is really important in dealing with difficult coworkers. But what I am saying to you is Don't give them an audience, especially if they are the type to enjoy putting on a show. If someone says or does something that needs to be addressed, it doesn't have to be addressed in the moment. If I could get a do-over in my situation, I would have taken the time to calm down and respond with intention and in privacy. And I would have let her outburst speak for itself without getting anywhere near her level. And honestly, I could have avoided the whole situation if I had followed the next strategy to work with someone that you hate. I cannot tell you how many messages I get from people a day recanting tales of their coworker and how they are a Machiavellian evil genius when they really aren't. You need to stop giving your toxic coworker that much credit. In most cases, the person that you don't like isn't intentionally trying to sabotage or destroy you. Their behavior is simply selfish, which is why you shouldn't assume malice when stupidity will suffice. I'm curious to hear what your experience has been, because especially when it comes to ruthless corporate climbers and jerks, they're typically not that smart. Like, I can't believe someone has the capacity to plot your professional demise when they don't know how to go full screen in PowerPoint. Chances are much higher that they are just not the brightest bulb in the bunch, and the vast majority of consequences are completely unintentional. Plus, life becomes way less stressful when you assume positive intent. And giving them the benefit of the doubt doesn't just help them. Life becomes way less stressful when you assume positive intention. Which is easier said than done, I know, but it gets a lot easier to do with the next strategy to work with a difficult coworker that you don't like. And it's one that I know you're going to be skeptical of, but it has solved so many problems for both me and my clients, and I know it is going to be an absolute game changer for you too. Pretend your coworker is great to work with, great at their job, and that they're obviously a good person. I used this strategy with both of my vile coworkers that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. In one case, it was transformative, and in the other, it was diabolical. Let's start with the first one, which is the person that I ended up having that public spat with. I was able to completely neutralize the situation with this strategy. Like Pavlov, I used positive reinforcement to reward good behavior. This coworker was also clearly just a miserable human being who was taking out her misery at work. And quite honestly, I felt bad for that. So, like with anyone else, I would offer praise, encouragement, and validation when it was merited. While I never liked her, nor do I think she ever liked me, and we're certainly not in touch today, we did get to a stage where we were able to work together well. But the other one, she was perhaps the most toxic person I have ever encountered in my life. And several people I worked with at that company have reached out over the years to tell me the exact same thing. She was a bully who expected certain reactions from people, but she did not expect what I did to her or that I made it a spectacle, and she did not know how to react. When she threw me under a bus, I followed up by sending praise and CCing the executive team. When she was making backhanded comments to conceal her toxicity, I acted completely oblivious. When she wasn't getting a reaction, she made her toxicity more direct, and I continued to either act oblivious or like she had just said the funniest, most sarcastic thing ever. I played stupid until she had to be so overt with her intentions that she ended up exposing herself and destroying her own professional reputation in the process. Best of all, she couldn't flip it because I had conspicuously done nothing wrong. There is no way that I would have been able to use this strategy or to that effect without the next strategy as well. This one is crucial, especially if you have a history of working with toxic people. Your past experiences influence your perception of different events that play out at work. And that person you don't like at work might be hitting a specific nerve in a specific way. The key to becoming unbothered at work is to deactivate your triggers. Let's be real. You don't really care about the people that you work with whom you really don't like. Now, I know it's ironic because I'm talking about them in this video, but I can promise you, while my vile coworkers got in the way, other than the active hassles that they caused, they didn't faze me. A lot of colleagues from that company have reached out to see if that is the toxic company, but I actually didn't think it was a toxic work environment despite their drama. Though some people I worked with have definitely reached out because they did experience workplace toxicity at the hands of those two awful coworkers. Remember, a toxic work experience is an individual experience. And the reason why I wasn't bothered by these coworkers was simple. I had done the work to heal from the toxic work experience that I had. If you have had a toxic job, job. And if you know that there is some toxic workplace baggage that you need to unpack, do not wait to deal with it. Most people avoid it because they think getting over their toxic job is difficult or complicated, but it's really not. Especially when you have my Get Over Your Toxic Job guidebook to get you started. I created it to be the first step in your toxic workplace recovery and to get you on the path to being unbothered by anyone at work. If you want to learn more or just get your copy right away, go to toxicworkplacerecovery.com. Now, we need to talk about the next strategy to deal with people that you don't like at work. When you work with someone that you don't like, and especially if you have a toxic coworker, you probably avoid them. While playing dumb and doing the inner work to be unbothered is effective, it's also crucial to be willing to have productive conflict. So many people I speak to hide from confrontation at work, partially because they don't want to deal with the drama and spectacle like I did. But mainly, they avoid confrontation because it doesn't feel safe. Maybe you've been avoiding it too, and you feel like the other person will blow up. They won't like you, or your boss won't like you, or you're afraid that you're going to get in trouble. The thing is, when you do not confront bad behavior, it festers. If a coworker said something to offend you, privately tell them that that wasn't cool. Maybe they were being a jerk and they're going to continue to be one. But in most cases, they probably didn't mean it and they're going to apologize and not do it again. Which brings me to the most important strategy to work with people that you do not like. No one talks about how draining it is to work with a difficult coworker that you do not like. They are energetic vampires. And at the end of the day, you are tapped out. Most people cope with strategies like avoidance. Of course, minimizing your interactions with that awful coworker will alleviate the problem, but it's not going to solve it. Unless you quit, they quit, or someone gets fired, they're still there. Even when you avoid them, there's still the cognitive load of bumping into them, dealing with them in meetings, etc., that is going to drain you on a daily basis, which is why the most impactful thing you can do in the situation is detach. When you detach at work, it makes all the strategies before this one come naturally, and it positions you for success. In fact, you need to go watch this video next so that you can be unbothered by working with people that you don't like.